Business from Stephen. He's taken his coat off and put it over the back of the desk. He's joining us in his suit instead. GameStop, back in the news. Its shares skyrocketing again on Wednesday, Stephen.
Yeah, that's right. Shares in the video game retailer jumping in the last 90 minutes of trading on Wall Street. So much so that they had to be suspended from trading twice. It's not exactly clear what sparked this sudden rally, although GameStop's chief financial officer announced he was leaving the company on Tuesday. This is reminiscent of the frenzy that we'd seen around GameStop. Last month, posters on the website Reddit's Wall Street Bets forum have been celebrating this news. The message board was, of course, central to the first rally in GameStop shares. The shares in the company finished the day up 100% at the end of trading. They continue to rise in after-hours trading as well. The rally also helping the cinema chain AMC. They'd been caught up in the first Reddit rally as well. Now, this jump isn't quite reaching the heights of the previous rally we've seen in GameStop's share prices. At one stage in January, they went over $347. They've been hovering about $50 since the start of February, now up to just over 90.
Now, the German chemical giant reporting a massive loss for the last year, Stephen.
This is Bayer. It lost €10.5 billion in 2020, mainly due to the cost of legal settlements over its weed killer Roundup. Last June, it reached a deal worth almost €8 billion to settle the bulk of some 100,000 claims in the United States that the product causes cancer. Bayer's annual sales were largely unchanged last year. The company saw an increased demand for what it calls self-care products.
Meanwhile, the pandemic had a major effect on the finances of the French aerospace and defence giant. This is Safran.
Profits at Safran plunged by more than 50% last year. The company builds plane engines for Airbus and Boeing. Earnings at this civil aviation division were down by more than 40% over the year. The company says it is expecting activity to pick up in the second half of 2020. Let's take a look at what's happening on the markets for you next. European shares starting the day up after the Dow Jones closed at a record high on Wall Street on Wednesday. Bayer shares opening down only around 0.5% though after the news of their losses in those latest financial results. Safran shares up 1.6% at the open in Paris. We had strong gains across the Asian markets in trading today as well. The Kospi and Seoul up 3.5%, boosted by the likes of Samsung, Tokyo and Hong Kong, both seeing gains of over 1%.
Now to a big shift in the movie industry because of the pandemic.
Big cinema releases are now coming faster to the small screen. Paramount Pictures, the latest studio to announce that it's slashing the usual 90-day window given for films to be exclusively in cinemas. Both Mission Impossible 7 and A Quiet Place 2 will be available on its streaming service, Paramount Plus, just 45 days after initial release. Both films had their release dates delayed because of the pandemic and the closure of movie theatres. Paramount Plus is launching next month. The company's going to face big competition in streaming, though. We know that, of course, there's the likes of Disney and Netflix, big players there, content being key as always. Will people be signing up for Mission Impossible 7?
Can't sign up for everything, can you? That's the trouble. Finally from Stephen, some bad news. This is in the latest financial results from the Australian airline Qantas.
We know that 2020 was really difficult for airlines everywhere in the world, but particularly for Qantas. The company stopped almost all international flights last June because of Australia's strict rules on travel during the coronavirus pandemic. The airline's CEO now says he doesn't see international travel resuming until October. Camille Nedelec reports.
Revenues nosedived at Australian carrier Qantas as the pandemic and border closures shut down international travel. The airline's earnings dropped by €4.5 billion in 6 months and over €7 billion for the whole year. For the second half of 2020, it reported losses of almost €1 billion. A harsh reality facing airlines everywhere, but Qantas was particularly hard hit.
Just considering the trading conditions we had to deal with in the half explains why these numbers are so dramatic. Border closures meant we lost virtually 100% of our international flying and 70% of our domestic flying.
The airline now says it's not expecting international flights to resume until late October of this year. But Qantas does expect to be back up to 60% of pre-COVID domestic capacity by the end of March and 80% by the end of June. The one bit of good news, more people shopping online boosted the company's freight business, meaning Qantas International saw profits worth over €30 million in the second half of 2020. Qantas has already made massive cuts to cope with the crisis, with 8,500 jobs being axed last year, while another 7,500 will remain on furlough until international travel starts up again.